biggest financial scandal ever. $65 billion. Gone.
His business was a giant Ponzi scheme.
Fortunes lost, retirement funds vaporized.
Tonight, as much as $50 billion is gone.
Lives ruined.
Mark Madoff became the third suicide linked to his father's fraud.
The mastermind is Bernie Madoff. It's a Shakespearean tragedy wrapped up in Wall Street. There was one journalist, one man, who had access to Madoff, who wrote the book that the blockbuster Netflix docuseries was based on, and he is with us today. Welcome, everybody. I'm Tom Zenner of Tom Zenner Scandal, co-host of One Degree of Scandalous with the one and only Kato Kaelin.
I'm here today live, only because of our guest. I usually phone it in.
Yeah, right. Kato, just like the Idaho murder story last week, which I was like fascinated with and really wanted to get the details. I think the same thing is going to happen today. When you go to the number one authority, which we are lucky enough to have done today, we're going to find out exactly. And on all the inner workings of this, how that doc got done, how he gained the trust of the family to be able to talk to them.
I'll tell you something. Before we bring out our guest, I watched the doc, and I think not only direction is fantastic, but you have got to have the world's best editor. The way they edit that, and the way you watch it, you want to wait for the next one to start up, I did a one-time sitting, and I just watched it all, and I can't, having this guest, and who's in the doc, it just blew me away, and what a story. Access to Bernie Madoff, but access to the entire family of Ruth,
Andy and Mark. The two sons. Right. And think about this, Kato. Bernie Madoff's whole life was about lying. And then to get him to finally open up, how do you do that?
It's a Machiavellian story,
right?
With this sly, how he got people to do this. But I've got my questions ready. I just want to hear the story of how it all happened with our guest.
Let's do it. Okay, let's bring him in. Jim Campbell. He wrote the book on Madoff. He got access to Madoff, and then Netflix was all over this. Hell, all of Hollywood was all over this. A lot of people wanted this story. Jim, joining us from Greenwich, Connecticut. Jim, great to see you today.
Jim Campbell.
Hey, it's my honor to be here, Tom, and on Scandal, and to meet Kato. And I appreciate how much work you guys have done watching it, the Netflix, and preparing for this. It does mean a lot. It's Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street on Netflix, and Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history from McGraw-Hill. Glad to be here.
Yep. And we're going to promote both of those too again. But hell, I mean, half the world watched the Netflix doc. I think they got over 128 million views like in the first couple of weeks. So it's a phenomenal piece. It's unbelievable. Yeah,
I was going to ask kind of a disclaimer to find out something really quick before we even start, is to find out with Jim, if Jim, seeing that, did you have access? Were you in the prison talking to Bernie? Were you on the phone? How did you correspond? Because I imagine that if you visit in prison, Bernie Madoff is going, at least I've got this intelligent person to talk to. I've got this, sort of these prisoners that I'm with. So tell us the story of Jim. Did you go to the prison and talk to Bernie Madoff?
Yeah. The warden of the prison, if you can believe this, refused to allow me to come because he called me a security risk. They knew I was writing a book. The other piece of this is when you get into the face-to-face, you may have no note-taking stuff at all. And if you do it on the phone, he's got to hang up after 10 minutes, get back in line, and go to the next 10 minutes, both of which are really infeasible to get the information. Now, what we ended up doing is over 400 pages of communications, starting off mainly with these beautifully scripted, handwritten, 7-page, both sides of the page, sort of mea culpas, his version of the story, all kinds of detail, and then gravitating to the prison email system. And I could beat him up. I could ask him anything he wanted, and long responses. I'll tell you, one of the most bizarre things to give you a sense of his lack of remorse. He didn't even know me, obviously, nor did the family. They were trusting me with their reputations. Bernie had a different agenda, obviously, than the family that thought they were innocent. And he writes me these long, long letters. Meanwhile, Andy and his girlfriend, Catherine Hooper, who was brilliant and helped me get inside the firm, his apology to them was a 1-sentence letter. So sorry, not even love, so sorry, Dad. At the same time, he wrote me, a guy he doesn't know, 7 pages of sort of mea culpa stuff. It's just Shakespearean beyond all
Yep.
comprehension.
And we're going to get into all of that, and you know, just the dynamics of this family, and you know, you mentioned the key word, I think, Jim. It's trust, because you don't just call up the warden one day and say, "Hey, can I cruise by at 5 today? I want to talk to B. Madoff, prison number 6643." It doesn't work that way. You have to penetrate and get the access through the family. So it's all about trust, and I'm sure there were not many people that the Madoffs trust at that point. I'm talking about wife Ruth and the 2 sons, the key figures here. So how did it even begin?
Yeah.
I know you had worked on Wall Street at one time, but I mean, you just don't email her or text her and, "Hey, I'd like to write this book." So how did you gain the trust to initially allow them to speak to Bernie?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's really sort of unbelievable, because I was doing an interview with a woman named Lori Sandell, who'd written a book on the family life that Andy and Catherine had cooperated with a bit and forced Ruth to. And she, out of the blue, says, "You know, you're interviewing me tomorrow. Do you want to talk to Andy on background?" Now, you got to recall, this is around 2011. This is the most vilified family on the planet. They're unapproachable. They obviously can't talk to anybody because the entire law enforcement world and the bankruptcy trustee and everybody's after them, the FBI. And so I get on the phone with Andy. I start attacking him right away. You know, I said, "Your father gave you $3 million to buy an Upper East Side condo months before this happened. Don't you think you ought to give that money back?" And he disarmed me by saying, "Absolutely." And by the end of the conversation, he said, "You know, Jim, your show is live. I'm listening tomorrow. And if I hear the same kind of things, I'm going to cooperate with you." He listens. He feels he hears what's acceptable in his mind. And by coincidence number 2, his mother's moving to Greenwich from Florida. I live here. And I said, "Well, Andy, why don't I take her out to lunch? No one else is going to want to talk to her." And he sets it up. We get into the restaurant. There's nobody there on a December day except us initially. She doesn't take her sunglasses off because she doesn't want to be recognized. Highly attractive woman in her 70s. And we hit it off totally until leaving, when I said, "Ruth, can I get a picture of us?" And she goes, "You're wired, aren't you?" And once Andy verified I was not wired, she introduced me to Bernie. And Bernie tells me, "On the recommendation of my son and Ruth, I'm going to cooperate with you." Now, meanwhile, Andy was not speaking to him and never spoke to him one word after he turned him in. But somehow, you know, maybe Ruth said it. And Ruth was, at that point, not communicating much with him. And that's how it happened. And think about this. You have Ruth, Catherine Hooper, Andrew, and then Bernie on the other side, all trusting a guy they don't have a clue about with their legacies.
Well, you come across as trustworthy, because some writers and journalists are a little bit different, but you kind of get the vibe that you're no nonsense yet.
Yeah.
And plus, when you lay all your cards on the table, saying this isn't going to be a puff piece. I mean, this is going to be the realities and the details of what actually happened. Someone's got to tell the story.
Yeah.
And you can't wait forever because they're old, right? And Bernie was in failing health at that time. He died not that long after that. So, I mean, what was the one thing you think that got them, that the light went off and say, this is the guy to do it?
You know, that's the $64,000 question, because some people say exactly what you do, is that I come across as straightforward. And by the way, they all knew they weren't going to be able to see any of the book, and that I was going to call it as I see it. If I found any evidence of their involvement, it was going in. And the first time they had any inkling was right before the book came out. I was on CBS Sunday Morning. And I know from Ruth's lawyer and Catherine Hooper, they all watched it. That was the first time they heard any conclusions that I had reached. Here's something also that's amazing. Catherine Hooper told me, to the depth of her soul, she would not believe that Andy was involved, but she said, "Jim, if you find it, I'll accept it."
Wow.
Yeah, powerful.
Yeah, I would think also with certain things in the documentary just would just makes you the Shakespearean feeling of how Ruth they went on these exotic trips. They had everything. Like I said, $65 billion. He could have done anything. And towards the end of it, you see Ruth driving off with those sunglasses that Jim talked about. I think it was in like a Honda Accord.
Yes,
or something.
And it just had dents in it. And she was living in a condo in Greenwich for $1,900 a month, and every single expenditure over $100 had to be reported to the bankruptcy trustee.
Yeah. The tight leash at that point.
But that feeling of just complete my life sort of over of what I used to have.
Yeah.
And, maybe she found solace. Jim talked to her, so I don't know how she
Well,
is
that's
now.
a dichotomy, right?
Exactly.
And it's a powerful image of what was and what isn't. And she probably had more peace driving up in that dented old sedan than maybe back in the day. But I mean, that's a tough life to give up. And I think, Jim, Kato, we got to go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, you just don't take a college course on how to be a great Ponzi schemer, right? I mean, a few things happen that lead to another thing, to a cover up here, to a oh shit here, to and then boom, you're 20 or 30 years down the road. He grew up in Queens, not an impressive kid, right? He wasn't Ivy League potential. His parents, tried their best, I'm sure, but they never really, they weren't real successful in whatever they were trying to do. So he had that as a backdrop for all of this. And then what the key point, I think, to me, Jim, was Ruth's father, right? Because that was the entree, at least into the financial world, where you could get exposed to investors and potential clients. So can you just talk about Bernie, who he was before this?
Yes. And Bernie did come from nothing, and he had parents, particularly his father, who failed in several business ventures. So I used to ask him, did you have this huge fear of failure? And of course, he had very little insight into himself. But he said, Madoff probably did. I would say, Bernie, you're Madoff. And so he's unbelievably driven, right? And Ruth is from a bit more money, obviously, as we said, her father. And so he felt that he married up, and he ran an accounting firm that he ended up introducing business to Bernie. And they turned that into essentially a hedge fund, the Ponzi scheme. And that's how he got started, with 20 people, and then it exploded. Ruth thought Ruth's father thought he was a bit of a bullshit artist, which he was, and it's just an amazing story. Now you got to remember one thing: Ponzi schemes, by definition, cannot succeed. So there's a lot of feeling that this is a one-man show that he pulled off. But essentially, this could not have been pulled off if he was not enabled by co-conspirators, by Wall Street, by the SEC, and by his 17th floor employees. We can talk about all of that. But I do want to convey that really the untold story is the complete failure of the regulatory system and Wall Street. This guy was not just a Wizard of Oz on the 17th floor behind locked doors, pulling this off.
Yeah.
He became also chairman of NASDAQ. This is how good this guy could lie. And the big thing in story is when he tells his sons, this has all been one big lie. So he's been lying sort of his whole life. And Tom, I would think that, wouldn't you at one point while this is going on, that he is right in the beginning, that he's going, I better stop doing this. This is just going to keep snowballing. He had to have that, at least that one look in the mirror going, do I go for it or do I stop? And obviously he goes for it.
But if he tried to stop, he wouldn't have the funds to pay those other people back.
Yeah,
right.
Take money from Peter to pay Paul, the whole Ponzi scheme. But it got bigger and bigger. Why not stop at $1 million? And it just got bigger. I don't know why, Jim.
That's a brilliant point, and it really gets to the core of his psyche, which is that he could not bring it to a halt because you get to that certain size, you got to keep it going. But the fact is, it started off at zero. And he could have stopped it at 1 billion, 3 billion, not 65. And here's the thing. A lot of people don't realize this. He ran a 100% legitimate business on the 19th floor, a wholesale market maker. That was worth $3 billion at its peak. He never cheated people. He was very customer friendly, much more customer friendly than a typical Wall Street firm. Then on the 17th floor, he had this dark business behind locked door that even his sons didn't have access to the code. And he's running a completely dishonest criminal enterprise from day one. He tried to say it was 1990, but it was day one. And inside the same brain, he was doing this, which is unbelievable. Split. Berlinger does a great job by recreating both floors in the Netflix docuseries because they represent both sides of his brains. The successful business fit his psychology. You need low costs, recurring revenues, commissions is how I made his business, good people, good technology, and you make money whether the market goes up or down. Downstairs, he's managing money, and he realized I can lose money on trades, and he could not deal with that. What should he have done? Gotten out of that business right away. Instead,
Right.
he ran the Ponzi scheme. He could never say that he could fail as investors. He could never say that he couldn't do anything. And so he made the whole thing up from day one, and it snowballed like that. At the same time, he's running this clean business.
Yeah.
Wow.
And imagine what he was dealing with internally.
Oh.
Because he was famous. I mean, he's like an MLB all-star, if you want to equate it to sports, or he's like an Aaron Rodgers or something like that. When it comes to Wall Street, he was almost like godlike. So imagine every door gets opened, right? Every opportunity. You want to get in the Palm Beach Country Club? You're in.
Yeah.
Right.
Private jet, this, that. I mean, like you're living a life of royalty. And then meanwhile, 2 floors down in the Lipstick Building, in Manhattan,
The
is this
assets management is just totally illegal. You bring up the Palm Beach Country Club, and Jim, I would think that when he was at that country club, people would come up to him and want to give him money where he would turn them down. And that is part of him being sly, because the more you can't have something, the more you want something. And I imagine he got more by doing that. He probably got more money from people.
It's even more than you say, because he didn't like to deal with people directly. Even his hedge fund guys or manage them. He had guys in that club who were saying, "Bernie's cut off the funds. I'm the only guy that can get you in." And then that's how they would get in. Or, people would go to Bernie and he'd say, "I don't really want your money. Don't want your money." And then they would do whatever they could to get into it. And this was an affinity crime, right? 85% Jewish and Jewish people and charities. So it was complete trust. We don't know what he's doing. No one understood his strategy, even though it's conceptually very simple and impossible to do what he said he was doing. In fact, it could have been uncovered in under 5 minutes. And that was the whole thing. I told him, "Bernie, the reason you're a great con man is because you're the anti-con man. You're sitting in a room on the 17th floor. You're not talking to anybody. You're saying you don't want any money. You don't need it." At the same time, he was sucking it in from everywhere he could get.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is he never left a digital trail, right? So everything that was going on the 17th floor, Kato, was they would look at the trades from the previous day to kind of rationalize these gains that they were, selling that their customers, and dot matrix printers, it's like smoke and mirrors, the whole thing. It reminds me of a mob running a book, a sports book or something. It was absolutely crazy. And do you think that's where the regulatory commissions should have stepped in, the SEC, but they probably couldn't even get into the 17th floor. But how soon should this have been shut down if people had done their jobs?
Yeah.
Like right away?
It could have been and should have been. The SEC, for instance, and Bernie told me this story. It was a Friday evening, right? And Bernie is telling them that here's my account number at the DTC, which is a depository trust company where every trade has to clear, right? So that the Wall Street knows that both sides of the counterparties have money to bring across. Everything goes through there. So he says, you call up, just call the DTC, account 646. You'll see in my wholesale business, every single trade is accounted for, 600,000 trades, right? And then you ask for the sub-account on the investment advisory business, and you will see every single trade there. And guess what? They never made. So he says, "Jim, I'm expecting to be arrested, handcuffs by Sunday at the latest." They never called the place. There was no IA sub-account. There was never one real trade in that business. And the SEC had their hands on it right then. J.P. Morgan was his bank, right? J.P. Morgan was the only entity that had a view inside his funds, right? His account, the 703 account it was called for the last 3 digits, had $170 billion run through it over that time frame. Bernie had told him it was an operating expense account for like rent and, paper clips and stuff like that. In that account, it should have been easy to see. If you're trading stocks, right, you got to have the person you're trading against, a counterparty, right? He's going to either deposit funds or you're going to pay him. That'll be in there. It's an equity strategy. $4 billion of dividends should have been in there, right? And there was never one counterparty ever in that account, never $1 of dividends deposited. And Bernie told me himself he never had more than $5.9 billion at the maximum amount of cash he had at any one time. So the SEC missed 5 separate investigations, including clearing him for what they'd already cleared him for. And on and on.
This guy, this guy would throw a Hail Mary pass and complete them each time. And the one that was amazing is when he knew he was defeated. And then I forget the woman's name from Europe. She comes in with a $3 billion for him to continue this Ponzi scheme. I forgot her name, but she was cleared.
Yeah,
she didn't
Sonia Cohn. Not only she built a fund that was full of the baddest people on earth, oligarchs from Eastern Europe, from Russia, drug lords. In fact, the drug lords threatened J.P. Morgan when they tried to get their money out, and that's when J.P. Morgan, only time they ever turned them in. I had access to Bernie's contacts. I had every single phone number for every one of these people in the world, and his diary, and I had her phone number. And I was told if I called her, I'd get myself killed. And my wife would say, "You're not calling her unless she was pissed off, and go call Sonia,"
I dare you. I'm begging you. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, that's crazy. And I want to get into the personal side of this, just how much this took over your life and just how long it took you to do this, the sales process, Netflix's involvement. We'll get to that in a minute. The thing, Kato, I'm always fascinated by the psychological aspects of this too, because with Bernie Madoff, man, you talk about, just this crazy juxtaposition of what's going on in his life. Now, he's got a successful business. Now, it's not like that big on Wall Street if it's $3 billion, but it's successful. I mean, a very good living, a very good life, and then knowing what's going on 2 floors down. Jim, did you get the sense talking to him? Did he ever have a peaceful moment in his life? Yeah. Because he knew it could blow up at any single second. Or do you think at some point he got, I've outsmarted everybody and I'll just ride this out and live the good life until the cuffs are put on my wrist? Yeah.
Let me say something first. That wholesale business rose from 0 to number 3 in volume on Wall Street and broke the New York Stock Exchange monopoly. So it actually was a pretty big deal. I tried to get inside. First of all, I got inside his brain, I think, very well. But I tried to get him to look inside his brain because he did not have a lot of insight into why he did it. But there's a sense that he had the skills that people have in wartime, which is called compartmentalization, because in order to deal with that level, in that case of violence and threat, you have to be able to sort of partition your brain off from that. And I think he was incredibly good at compartmentalizing stuff away. And by the way, this is why Wall Street was a great place to pull this off. A Wall Street firm is highly compartmentalized, right? Because you have to have Chinese walls between the trading floor, the investment bankers, because if the investment bankers are working on a merger deal, you cannot let the traders know, right? So in that case, information did not flow freely. And he was the only guy that saw the information throughout the firm and throughout the customers. And in fact, that was pretty much the number one thing that allowed him to get away with for so long, is because nobody else had insight into what he was doing. For instance, nobody knew that the total of all this was $65 billion. Nobody. They added up. That's all the fake accounts that every month they sent those statements out. But nobody on that floor knew what that total was. They thought he was running a $5 billion business. Most people didn't even know he was running a hedge fund. Mm-hmm. So he controlled all the information flow.
Yeah. Yeah, and Kato, in 2008, that was a big financial crisis, right, because of the mortgages and everything. But he got arrested like in December of 2008. So did they have anything to do with each other? Did that trigger the fuse that they were able to find him?
Yeah, this is what happened. Is once the Lehman Brothers went down, and then Bear Stearns, and there was a total collapse. He had no gates on his fund, meaning that if you called him at noon, "I want my money out," he would have it sent to you, right? And so he got literally requests for a couple $1 billion, and he was down to his last $200 million. And this is another classic. Kato said, why didn't he bring it to an end? What more perfect time than when the market crashes 40% to say 40%'s vaporized? And I feel terrible about it. You know what he was showing in December? Slight gains. And he didn't use that opportunity either. He was, the day before he confessed, he took another $250 million from one of his close friends to go into the fund. So
that guy would never see again, obviously.
Yes.
I mean, it's vapor. It's gone.
Gone.
Yeah. This is a kind of an interesting thing, because greed is at the center of all of this, right? Clearly, he's greedy. it was a runaway freight train as well, where he couldn't maybe have even stopped it if he wanted to later on. Now, tell me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of these investors were greedy too. And when I look at this, and when you know something is too good to be true, and it just beats the performance of any other investment or any other firm on Wall Street, you're greedy. And now the people that really got caught were the ones that had the retirement funds and their pensions managed and maybe didn't even know. So I don't have that much sympathy for the people that were just looking, hey, he's smarter. This is working. I'm going to get rich. I don't care. But how many people had money in funds and didn't even know that Bernie Madoff was managing it?
The way I look at this, there's three sort of silos. That first silo is you use the word greed, and actually Bernie was not the greediest one. Bernie, this was ego, control, pride. But the biggest co-conspirator of the big four, as you've heard of, Jeffrey Pickauer, he took $7 billion out of that fund. Bernie only stole $800 million. This guy was the, and where else in a Ponzi scheme does somebody else make all the money? And he was a greedy guy. Area number two, there are people, and Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch are guilty of this. They knew that it wasn't kosher. They did not know it was a Ponzi scheme, but they did not turn him in, including their own clients that were invested, or JP Morgan that took their money out, but not their clients. Then there's group three, which is the really sad folks who started putting money in 40 years ago, their pension money, at some point all of their assets, because you could write checks on it nonstop, so you could use it as almost a bank account as they did. Those folks had no clue, didn't understand it. The most they did was, if you know his thing, he had a beautiful statements that go out on dot matrix, and behind him all these trades, confirms, in chronological order. So these people would go through this every month and they would say, this is beautiful, it's meticulous, it's all documented. We don't understand what the hell he's doing, but it's unbelievable. He's totally trustworthy. Wall Street loves him. And those folks were totally screwed. Now the hedge fund guys, the feeder funds, they're the worst of all in my mind, besides Pickauer, in that their job, right, is to take Cato's money and invest it in a hedge fund that fits his risk profile. Okay? In return, they get maybe 1% of the assets, a little sliver, it's a sales thing. But they're doing due diligence because they're telling Kato, we looked at that firm, okay? Bernie pockets the hedge fund fee as the manager, 2% of assets, 20% of gains, a huge amount of money. Bernie took that 2 and 20, as it called, and handed it back to the feeder fund. An unbelievable windfall. But what happened here? They were not allowed to do any due diligence. It was their entire job. And they were funneling all the money into Bernie's fund, not when they were saying, well, we've got 10 firms and we back it around and, different profiles. Those guys, and none of them went to jail. And those were the bad dudes, and they really bullshit the clients, and there's just a complete failure of Wall Street on that. And it turns out due diligence is complete BS, because you would assume they would have these risk management guys on with 800 degrees. We do all these steps. We do all this. It turns out due diligence can be anything you want the way it's set up. They have these beautiful marketing brochures going through all this stuff, and there was nothing there. Bernie told Fairfield Greenwich risk management guy, he gave him the script to what he was supposed to say to the regulators.
Pickauer, who got $7 billion, do you think he had the blackmail on Bernie? Do you think that he knew everything that Bernie was doing was illegal, but he kept his mouth shut, but he said,
great point, because what they had was mutual assured destruction, right? Because Bernie knew that Pickauer knew this stuff was going on. They didn't know it was a Ponzi scheme, but they knew that it wasn't kosher. And Pickauer knew that he could blow up Bernie. And so he would put $100 million in. He'd be able to get that money out in weeks and make $2 billion off of that, that one investment. Bernie was scared of him and couldn't deal with it. This is not in the book, by the way, and this is to give you a sense of the passive aggressiveness of Madoff. Pickauer had a house next to Madoff's in Palm Beach, right? Bernie had an affair with Pickauer's wife. The giant FU.
Oh my!
And Ruth stayed with him? I mean,
Well, Ruth, they were together since they were 13, and even she admitted to me that even after all this stuff happened, it was hard for her to let him go, and she did not know about that kind of stuff, as she said. And she once told me, we were having lunch together, and she says, "Did you know about this stuff?" And I said, "Well, I know about it now," but I couldn't say another word about it. It was just so stressful to say it, or to deal, because I knew how much pain it put her in. By the way, we were so close at one point, we could text each other anytime. She'd respond right away. It was really a pretty amazing thing. She wished me Mazel Tov on the book, which should have blown the whole family up, and it was very touch and go whether I was going to be able to say Andrew and Mark did not know, because there was one big piece of thing that looked like they would have to be tied to, and I found the deep throat in the firm and other evidence that they did not know. But it was close.
Last thing I want to talk about the Pinkauer. Pinkauer's passed away, I'm pretty sure. But did he didn't turn any money back in, right? He got all $7 billion. And did that money after you passed away, is it still going in all family?
Well, first off, let me tell you two things. He died in the bottom of a swimming pool 1 year later, with a heart attack, and drowned. While he's under the feds are after him. His wife calls the. And Bernie really hated him. His wife she calls 911 and says, "My husband's on the bottom of the pool. I think he's dead. I fell asleep." Now, on what happened to his money, this was one of the reasons Bernie pleaded guilty, and the mutual assured destruction. The feds were going to go after $2 billion from Pinkauer. Bernie knew that he had billions more. 9 or 10 billion, a lot of it at Goldman Sachs. And so basically he said, "I'm going to blow up your whole family, your life, everybody, unless you return that money," which the leverage he had, because he'd already basically taken prison. All $7 billion of it came back. But the money that they did not get, part of it was in this Pinkauer Foundation, which was, again, completely corrupt. It was supposed to put money into medical ventures, right? But it was Ponzi money. That money was still being run by Barbara Pinkauer. I don't know if she's dead now, but right on up. So it was billions and billions more in that fund that was based on Ponzi money that should have been shut down and clawed back right away.
Okay, he's out of the pool now, though, isn't he?
They got him out of the pool. They said it was a heart attack, that it was not. He wasn't murdered or anything. But
she woke up from her nap.
Yeah.
There's no Russian oligarchs running away on video camera, or Mexican cartel leaders.
I don't know how long he was under there.
Jeez. It's speaking of all these people that are dying. Andrew, Mark. I think Mark commits suicide. Andrew dies with cancer, lymphoma. Do you think, which I think it is, it's just because of the cancer caused by the stress of people bullying him in the streets? I mean, their life is over, and everybody recognizes them. And you also think 100% that Mark Madoff did commit suicide.
Okay, what you said is it will allow me to highlight the difference between Mark and Andy's personalities. Andy was secure. He had Kathleen Hooper, who was devoted to him. He was going to move on with his life mentally. He wasn't going to let it kill him, and he had confidence. Mark, very fragile, needed his father's love, which his father withheld a lot. And his father was actually protecting them from being involved, but Mark took that personally, that he wouldn't let him get involved. And "I don't know what you do downstairs, Dad." And he would say, "Shut the F up and mind your own business." And he couldn't deal with that. And so, yes, the bullying in the streets really bothered Mark. It would not have bothered Andy. And Mark's wife was going to dump him, which also was not good. And let me tell you this story that'll give you chills. Madoff's right-hand person, Eleanor Squilleri, who is a tremendous human being, that very day, the phones are ringing. All these people are trying to get their money out. She's having to go vomit every 20 minutes. It's so stressful. She finally leaves to go home at 7 p.m., and her daughter, Sabrina, calls. Sabrina had worked as a summer intern when the boys were in high school as well, at the front desk there. This is hours after Bernie's arrested. She says, "Mom, I know Mark. He's not going to be able to handle this. He's going to kill himself." And 2 years to the exact day of Bernie's arrest, he did.
I mean, that's prophetic in a very tragic way, man. That is unbelievable. Which leads, Jim, to the $65 billion question. Yeah, this Ponzi scheme went on for decades, billions of dollars. Man, I'm married. Kato's married. You're married. I can't get away with anything in my house. If there's a couple extra crumbs, she goes, "Did you have a muffin?" I mean, you know what I'm saying? How?
Good question.
Did you go into this thinking that Ruth and the kids knew something? And what is your opinion after the process?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know what? I get that a lot. People saying, "Well, I would know if my husband was stealing money." But you know what I say? Your husband works for, let's say, IBM or anywhere else. Would you know if he's stealing money at work or doing something? Then they say, "Yeah, you're right. I probably wouldn't." And Ruth kept the checkbook for the 703 account. So what could look more incriminating, right? Up until the final year. But the thing is, she had no clue what was actually going on. It was a whirlwind of ins and outs. And she was monitoring the checkbook like your mother might have done, which is, did the check clear? Are the numbers in the right order? She had no idea what was going on underneath this. Now, I investigated completely on Ruth and the boys. The Department of Justice, the Southern District of New York, the FBI, the bankruptcy trustee all thought that they had to know. And they had 5 million pieces of paper that were related to this, and they would have done anything to handcuff these people on TV, and they never got arrested. And I believe strongly they did not know. Ruth, the day before, looked catatonic, so he had told her something, and she withdrew $10 million. She told me she did not know it was a Ponzi scheme until the next afternoon when they were in the Upper East Side apartment penthouse, and he confessed, and she told me the first thing she said was, "What is a Ponzi scheme?" And but if you read the book, particularly chapter 8, when I go through it in a lot of detail, and what all the potential issues were. And I do not believe they knew. I do believe they would have been caught if they did. I do believe that that if Ruth knew, she would not have been able to keep it from the sons. The sons definitely didn't know, even though, again, like she managed the checkbook, they managed the trading desks upstairs where he snuck all the money into the legitimate business, $800 million, through the trading desk. But I was able to prove why they didn't know that, even though they ran the desks. So yeah, I do not believe.
Okay.
And when you understand Bernie's psychology, one key factor, he would never have been able to confess to his family that he had to turn to criminal business to survive. He would never have admitted that.
No, because after that persona he built up for himself, there's no way. Did anybody from the 17th floor go to prison? Did his brother? I can't remember.
Yeah,
Peter
went
got
10 years.
10-year sentence, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then his daughter, Shayna, right?
Sorry?
His daughter, Shayna, also, Peter's daughter?
Yes. Yeah, she and her husband, I have no sympathy for them. They were in the compliance department, as was Peter. Now, Bernie didn't give him access to the truth, but he was signing books for downstairs that he knew were not real. They knew that they were doing stuff that they should not have done. He abused his brother. His brother was not involved in the Ponzi scheme, but benefited financially in a big way. Shayna's husband worked for the SEC and was involved in part of the screw-up of the Madoff investigation before they got married, and he left.
Yeah.
Only went to jail are Peter and Daniel Bonventry, who was the chief operations officer of the firm, and the people on the 17th floor, who I call the witless co-conspirators, who managed to run all these fake operations and never figure out it was a Ponzi scheme.
Right. Who was there's a part of the Netflix doc where I don't know who the genius, corrupt genius, how they change the computers, how they could make it look on the computer that people are making money, how they invented that software, however they did that. So you believe, look, I'm making this money. It's on the computer. It's on the screen. Is that the gentleman I forgot you just mentioned his name?
Frank
Was he the one that? He came up with that software that you could scam.
This software was so good that, I told you about the DTC, right? Well, you have a DTC screen in your office that gives you can actually see your inventory live, right? So they had a screen set up in a room down the hall, and these guys, when they would come in, they would say, like, so Tessie, do you really have these shares of Apple? And they'd say, well, go down there and look down there. And they would put a fake screenshot of the Apple inventory, which the reason they figured out, once they broke the thing up, the metadata showed the actual date, right? And it wasn't the live stream. But this was what they used to do. This SEC would be in. They'd be upstairs in the glass room outside his office, so he could control the investigators, not let them go anywhere. And he'd have them run a huge report downstairs on 17, which could have been 1,000 pages. But they didn't want to hand it to the SEC hot to show that it was right off the thing. They'd put it in the refrigerator for a while, take it out and throw it around like a football, and then come delivering to these idiots from the SEC.
So
True
corrupt.
idiots, though.
So corrupt.
I know, but so brilliant.
Yeah,
In
that's
some
what
way,
I'm
if you're
saying.
a
They came up
criminal,
with these.
It's unbelievable.
So someone's thinking,
Yeah.
how do I become corrupt? How do I convince these people that were legit? The way that Bernie's mind worked to outfox everybody that came into his office.
Yeah, made a lot of people look stupid. That's for sure. There's another aspect of this, the clawback, right? So after the dust settles, he's convicted. There's a trustee appointed that has to try to claw back as much of the money as possible. It's a tough job. Those guys are not likable, especially if you're holding on some of that money and he's trying to get it back. This guy especially. What's your feeling on the clawback process, and how much did they get back?
I think that's one of the biggest untold scams ever pulled off. SIPC is the equivalent of the FDIC, which you know of, right? The FDIC, when a bank fails, they come in. It was formed in FDR in the New Deal, has never cost the government one dime, and has never screwed a customer out of one legitimate dollar, okay? Here's SIPC modeled on that, except that it's controlled by Wall Street. They had no money in the reserve fund, basically. The premium was $150 a year. In other words, Goldman Sachs was paying $150 for their version of the FDIC. So they hire a bankruptcy trustee. They think they've lost $65 billion, the investors. The first thing they do is, nope, we're not recognizing one dime of any of that profit growth, even though there's no way in any brochure that the SIPC said that, right? They only recognize what the original investment was. So that could be back 40 years before. That number was $19 billion. So right off the bat, they lost all the rest. The second thing is, where do you think they went to get that money from? Because SIPC didn't have it, right? They clawed it back from Madoff victims who'd already lost their money. Madoff victims that took out more money than they put in other words, they were withdrawing it. They went after them to get money to pay the guys that had left their money and left everything there. So regardless of whether you had no money on either side of that equation, that's where they got the money. Now they got back, when I finished the book, they'd gotten back $15 billion, which is unbelievable, right, for a Ponzi scheme. Well, $7 billion, came from Pick Hour that Bernie got. Another $3 billion came from the other. So 10 of the 15 came from the big four, right? This is what the trustee put in his pocket. For getting that money back, which was clawback of Madoff money, he pocketed $1.5 billion and counting into his law firm's pockets and pay for his expenses. All of which could have gone to victims. All of the money should have come out of SIPC, right? Or it should have come out of Wall Street on an assessment because they were asleep, or it should come out of Congress because the SEC failed. But they sucked it out of these poor guys again. So many of them were victimized twice. This guy is portrayed as a hero generally in the media because whoever got 15 billion back out of 19, even though it should have been out of 65, puts $2 billion in his bank's pocket and gets the money out of the pockets by clawing back the people that have already lost their money.
He had his own Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
That's $1.5 billion into the law firm.
No, almost 1.9. Right?
I'd say back when I did $1.5 billion into the law firm and $500 million to pay all the consultants that he brought in. And the SIPC fund had $1.6 billion to start. And you know what he says? What he says, this is even worse. We got this $2 billion, not one dime of that we take from any of that customer money we got back. Yeah, the $1.6 billion that was in the SIPC fund that's designed for customers, they pocketed that, and then the money they got from the other Madoff people that they paid each other back. So it was, and you know what's funny? He's a hero, right? They refused to see me 3 times. They refused Netflix, and you know who did see me? Who offered me his people to talk to? Who called me on the phone the day after the Netflix came out? Jamie Dimon. I don't know if you know who he is. He's
of course,
CEO of J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan gets killed in my book. They're totally culpable, and he gave me access. He calls me the next day and he starts to see if he could beat me up on issues he had with the documentary. Within a minute, he knew that he could see I knew more than he did. He started asking me questions. And I apologized for interrupting him the next day, and he said, no, it was a great conversation. So to me, Jamie Dimon has a lot more character because, if anything, he would have wanted to cover up how badly J.P. Morgan. And I'll tell you, I don't want to violate his confidence, but he used a pretty blunt term to describe how badly he feels that they didn't find that 703 account.
Right. Well, did you go to college with Jamie Dimon? Or
he was a year older than me.
Okay.
And I knew his roommate well. I didn't really know him that well. But it's not clear to me when he called, the next day he tried to call to talk to Berlinger, right? And Berlinger calls me panicked, because he does, how am I going to talk to this Wall Street guy? And it wasn't clear that he knew initially that it was the same Jim Campbell. Even though 2 years before, he had given me access to his people. And by the way, I'm such a ruthless jerk. When I asked him, he had just had an aortic valve dissection that he almost died. He's recovering from that. When I asked him if he would give me it, and he responded right away, and he let me do it.
Hey, you had a job to do. You weren't asking him to arm wrestle, or run a marathon, answer a few questions, collateral damage. Yeah. Hey, there's other movies that were done on this, a lot of other, media elements to it. What'd you think of the Robert De Niro movie they did on HBO or some of the other stuff? Was it accurate? Did you feel like they got it?
Funny you asked that. I did not watch any of those, nor did I read many of the books on it because I didn't want to be biased. Plus, I knew Bernie and Ruth, and I didn't like the thought of watching these people play them. Now, if you read the book, he did comment on the thing, what he didn't like, what he, in it, and it's in my book. I recollect he's very upset about the way they portrayed him beating up his brother, so he was very offended by it. I, to this day, have not watched it.
Okay. And last question for me is: are you still to this day? And when was the last time you actually talked to Ruth?
That's an interesting question too, because right around the time that it was going to come out from McGraw-Hill, she said, I don't want to talk anymore, and she never spoke to me again. Now, I think part of it was they were trying to get compassionate early release for Bernie because he was dying, and so I thought she probably thought it would not help her case if I was, because of my public connection. But she never did speak to me again. When the CBS Sunday Morning came out, before then, I gave her a book through her lawyer. He said that she watched it. She was very appreciative. And then since then, she stopped dyeing her hair, so she became unrecognizable. And I believe now that she's in a daycare type facility. So I have not spoken with her since the book came out.
Yeah, Jim and Kato, you probably caught this too. One of the interesting things you said that I did not know is, this had $65 billion in liquid flowing through these accounts, over the course of time. But Madoff only took out $800 million. Essentially, you figure a lot of that had to be for overhead for these offices because this is expensive rent and a lot of employees. He had the house on Montauk in the Hamptons. He had the membership at Palm Beach Country Club and the beautiful house in Palm Beach. Were there other extravagant things that could have triggered something? Or for a Ponzi schemer and for a stud on Wall Street, did he not showcase that lifestyle too much, or was he out of control?
He had a place in Cap d'Antibes in France. He had a private jet. He had the Palm Beach. He had the Montauk. He had the Upper East Side penthouse. So he had a lot of stuff. But one of the things about Bernie was he was very down to earth. He didn't come across at all as Gordon Gekko, right? The famous
Greed is good.
Greed is good. He was more like your avuncular grandfather type. They were not ostentatious, although they were worth at one point $800 million and $3 billion if he sold the firm. But he lived the last year or two. He was gone half the year between France, Palm Beach. They flew in a helicopter to Montauk every weekend, and so he lived a very good life. That $800 million was primarily into the firm to keep it solvent, right? A lot of other money, frankly, they took out of the firm. You know, Ruth was taking $50,000 a month in American Express charges. You know, that was getting paid by the firm, but it pales versus the $7 billion.
Right. Well, you spent a lot of time with him. You got to know the family. No one's dug deeper into this than you. The word monster is attached to Bernie Madoff. What's your takeaway of him? Is he a true monster?
Yeah, that's a really good question, too. It's a little bit not black and white. You know, I asked him, you know, Bernie, how do you feel about destroying all these people? And he would say, Jim, remorse is a tough... Jim, my lawyers tell me to say that I'm remorseful. But remorse is tough for me to show, because if you understand Wall Street, these are bad, greedy people. They weren't paying their taxes. This money was outside of the country in many cases. And if the poorer, lower net worth, the average folks, they would have had to lie to get into my fund, which is not necessarily true. And they're not in dumpster dives like they're saying. And he protected his sons. He ran a legitimate business. He, on rare cases, if you were, let's say, this really hurt the boys too. They would say, you know, our friend Charlie wants us to get in. They would go into his office, and then Bernie would hear their story and then say, not taking your money. And the reason was the boys. And of course, they didn't know that. So, you know, he's not a pure monster, but he has to be a sociopath to do what he did. And, you know, in the Jewish religion, to rip off a fellow member of that faith is like a sacrilege, which he took advantage of to a huge degree. Again, in part because of his ego and pride. He had to keep the thing floating, as opposed to pure greed.
Well, that was probably part of the reason that he did it with so many Jewish people. He knew how to manipulate them. Yeah. Of you know, this guy's going to be honest to us. He's one of us.
By the way, all the time, these feeder guys, like I told you at the Palm Beach, I'm the only guy that can get you in. There are people that warned them, saying, "This, you know, the guy's crooked," and they would say, "Bernie would never violate that trust to me." And you know, the famous French guy, where the book opens up, he had all kinds of kings and queens and royalties in his fund. And he had an expert who told him he couldn't make the numbers work, his risk guy. No, Bernie is totally trustworthy. And as soon as he had lost all their money, he split his wrists, you know.
Yeah, that was in the documentary. He put it by the garbage
can,
so he would
Bernie,
not.
When I asked Bernie about that, he says, that's all BS. He had guys after him from the mob and over there. And you know, so either he got killed or, you know, which is a total lie.
Right, it's rationalization, you know.
Yes.
When imagine just sitting in that prison cell, just knowing how many lives that you affected in a negative way, and if you have any conscience at all, it had to affect him. You would think, but maybe it didn't, because he is a sociopath, no question about it. Wow, that was fascinating, Jim. The other thing that really fascinates me and Kato is the process of turning this into a docuseries, and a very, very successful one, a huge one, a blockbuster hit. Yeah. Were you thinking a few steps down the road when you wrote the book, thinking, my God, this is going to be a movie, or this could be a documentary? Did you think about, or were you only focused on the book?
Was maybe 2-3 years down the road that somebody would want to do a documentary on this. And here's the amazing story. The book hasn't come out yet. We had 4 production companies come and ask to buy the rights to the book before anybody heard of me or the book was out. And as you know, that's how Hollywood normally works. The production company gets the rights, and then they try to get the streamer, Disney, HBO, you know, Max, or Netflix to buy it. And so we heard that, I guess Joe Berlinger at Netflix really wanted it. And so he went to Netflix and said, you know, can we try to figure out how to get this? So the first thing is they have a Zoom. This is the Zoom era. With Joe and his development team, and he's sitting in a V. He's in the front, and then his team is behind him. And I'm saying, okay, I'm going to start this Zoom by getting on my knees and going like, because he's like the top. So before I speak, he goes, Jim, my development team tells me we have to have this. What do we have to do to get it?
You were ready to beg.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then it went from there. And then they find out that Netflix is saying, forget the production companies. We're going to negotiate directly. So I had to get an agent at that point. And so we tried like 2 or 3 of the big ones. And I liked Katie the best at CAA. And she says, Jim, we're going to get you the best deal and the best director. And she did. She did. Totally. And not only that, they package it right. So they wanted me to be packaged with Joe, and then Netflix will get it, and then there would be a giant deal. She said, if you don't want to go with Joe, we'll find you, and you can talk to anybody else you want. Now I fell in love with Joe, and we got along great. And it was just an unbelievable experience. I had to then go train their whole people. They'd never done any finance stuff, right? Just murder, serial killer stuff. So I spent months training the whole folks on that. Then they developed the, I don't know what the word is because it's not a movie script, but the treatment, the way it was going to go, broken into 4 sections. And the book is highly complex because it goes through all these, Wall Street, the hedge funds, the SEC. They were totally true to the book, too. They could have just sexed it up right and made it much more glamorous. Joe had the idea to do the 2 floors to reflect the 2 sides of his brains that are totally different. I got to be filmed in each one, and it was just unbelievable. As you said, it was like 150 million people saw it, 200 countries. The way it works is I filmed 10 hours worth of stuff, but they filmed for like 5 months. There's pre-production I was in, and then they filmed for 5 months. Then Netflix takes it for 4 months to get it ready for all the countries. And by the way, Joe did a thing on Jeffrey Epstein, a documentary that was based off that writer who's written 400 million, sold 400 million books, big guy. It turns out,
James Patterson.
James Patterson. Turns out his research was terrible, and Netflix got sued. So, but Joe says, Jim, we're totally confident in yours. But Netflix, every time Netflix got a look at the raw cut, they came back with questions for me that they would ask me then, Joe's people taping. So they were following every friggin' piece of it. They did the name too. They had, Joe wanted to call a gentleman grifter, which I said, that's a shitty title.
Nah.
And,
yeah, that's not good.
Netflix came up with Madoff, the monster of Wall Street.
Yeah, that you nailed it, Kato. I think we can, safely tell Jim that's usually not the process in Hollywood.
Yeah,
right? Where people are getting on a Zoom and trying to get a bidding war going and things like that.
Let me say one other thing that is amazing. You talk about how Netflix treated me. Katie says, and Joe said this too. Now you asked for an executive producer credit. Now I don't know even know what that stuff means, right? Netflix says, nope, you can't have that because you're in it, okay? So you can get a co-producer, some lower level thing, right? I watched, they let me have it in preview, right? Right before it came out. So I'm seeing for the first time the credits roll, and it says co-executive producer. They gave me that title and never even told me.
That's cool. That's cool because usually a dollar sign's attached to that. I mean, this had to be lucrative. I mean, was doing the docu. You don't have to give us the exact details unless you want, but was doing the docu series and being involved in that and selling the IP and everything you had to do for that. Was that bigger than the book?
Yes.
Significantly.
Yes, much bigger.
I guess that leads to my question. Are you the Jim Campbell of the Soup family? I'm kidding.
No, he bought it. He bought it out for a hobby. Just because he wanted it. Why not?
I've always wanted to be that related to them because I got it. Mainly in my youth, I got asked that. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Well, now
good.
Yeah, now you're known for something a little bit more
well, congrats.
Just incredible. The whole project, the book, the docu-series, man, it had to be a blur in your life for a while though, because I know how daunting writing a book is. It's not easy, it's lonely, it's hard work. It's grueling, but then the glamour, and then you get to be involved in Hollywood to a certain extent. It had to be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and the stories behind the scenes are unbelievable. I'll give you 10-second. Jesse Waters is a Fox guy. It's the #1 cable show at 7 p.m. Okay, so anyway, they want me to come on right after SBF is arrested to talk about whether Bernie was going to be murdered by the mob and the Madoff story. So Fox is going to come to my house and set up the remote, right? So 20 minutes before, no one's there yet. So I'm, when's the guy showing up? And then he gets there. We got 10 minutes before. I said, when am I on? Am I on the last story? No, you're the lead story tonight. 40 seconds before I'm on in front of 6 million people, I couldn't hear anything in the earpiece. My hearing is bad, and it was all jumbled. 30 seconds, and we're going to go live, 6 million people. And the guy figured out how to route the sound through my cell phone speaker. They put it in my lap, and then I'm on with Jesse Waters.
And you are live. Wow,
that's
because that's a different thing for you. You're not used to doing live interviews, and then you're seeing the chaos around you. You're going, how are you going to pull this off? Yeah, that's stressful for sure.
And I said my last question, but my other question is this: you got your deal with the CAA. CAA handles probably the top notch actors, directors. I mean, they're probably the number one agency. Yes. Did I imagine some of the directors there and some of the actors possibly invested with Madoff? Did CAA do not mention their name, or was it okay to mention?
No one said anything about that, and they didn't try to censor any piece. They were just focused that anything I said was accurate or that was in the. Nobody said anything about that. I don't know if anybody with CAA was involved or not.
Right, and nobody wants to admit that either. You want to keep that on the down low if you lost money through Madoff.
Wasn't one of the people in the documentary, wasn't a major director, I don't want to say his name to get in trouble, but it had to do with a shark movie that was famous. And
okay, I mean, if it was in the doc, I don't remember that exact part, but if it was in there, it's accurate.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Spielberg that lost money with him, but...
That's what I was getting. It was, I thought he was in the doc.
Shit, I thought you were talking about Sharknado. No. I love Sharknado.
Sharkado.
That would be a good one. All right, so easy street now, Jim. You chilling? I know you still host radio shows. You work in the media, but I mean, life's got to be good.
Yeah, this has been an unbelievable experience. I love it. I love interviewing people, and nobody has been treated better than I was by the whole people involved in the Netflix thing. There was a huge number of people in that New Jersey studio, and I told them they built the two components of it, and it's been the honor of a lifetime. And it was lucky, to be honest. Madoff died 2 weeks before the book came out, and that's why it blew up. If that hadn't happened, no one would ever have heard of this. So I've been very lucky,
and do you invest in the stock market yourself?
Am I in the stock market? Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, if someone comes and offers you 20% gains every year, just throw all that Netflix money in there. I'm sure it's safe. I'm sure you're all good.
Yeah, it's
a winner.
That was great.
It is exactly. You know what? This may be an American thing, but maybe it's just human nature. We want to believe too good to be true.
Sure,
all the way.
Yep. You think, man, this is it.
Maybe this is the one too good to be true. Right. It's actually true.
And then there's always part of you that are going, really though? And then at the end you're going, why did I believe that?
Right,
why?
Right.
You have so much regret. Okay, the book is Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history, $65 billion. That's the book. Go buy it. Amazon, bookstores. It's a great book, obviously. Netflix turned it into the docuseries.
The Monster on Wall Street. Watch that.
Wall Street. And just continue this. The story will never get old. I mean, this story is timeless. It's evergreen.
And Jim is in the doc, so you got to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, all four segments. But let me say one thing. When I do this on college campuses in particular, I get to the last slide, and I say this. Forget all these numbers. Forget all the complexities. This is nothing more than a morality tale. This is a guy that had nothing but success, got off that beaten path, and you're always going to get caught. My dad is one of the most ethical people I've ever met in my life, and I dedicated the book to him. And that last slide, he gave me the foundation, the moral foundation and character. And Bernie admitted that he lacked that character and that courage to tell the truth. So it's a simple morality tale as well.
Yeah, when you break it down, and we all have Midwest backgrounds. Jim's from Chicago. We got Milwaukee. We got Minnesota here.
Integrity, Midwest.
Yeah. All right. Well, you nailed it, Jim. I mean, congratulations. It's been a pleasure. This is one of the stories I really wanted to cover for our audience for a long time. I think they're going to love this. Get the comments going. Let us know what you think of Jim. But you nail it like every media opportunity you handle is just you're top notch. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. I want to thank Jill Shively for connecting us. She's a great person, and the chance to meet Kato, and just Tom, your show seems outstanding. I love your fireball personality. You know, I wasn't going to be on. You want to come on in November? No, you come on tomorrow.
I know, and I was thinking that on the drive over there or over here today.
Tom is known as the monster of Hollywood.
No, Jim, thanks, man. I knew our audience would love it, and I knew you. I got the caveat here. You can meet Kato. Hey, by the way, any questions for Kato? I always ask our guests. Anything you want to know from the OJ scandal
or sports?
Let me ask you one question. How long did it take you to think OJ was really guilty?
You know, it's sort of a great question. It was double-edged sword. I didn't want to believe it. But one of the things that, first of all, he went to Chicago that night, so I thought there's absolutely no way because no one knew a timeline, nothing. So that was the one started to get in my mind is when he said, "Do you remember, Kato, that we were in the kitchen eating our food?" And I knew it was a lie. And I said, "Why would he lie about something like that?" And when it was so he wanted me to be an alibi, I felt. He didn't say that. I knew that's what he was saying, that you were with me. And I'm like, no, I wasn't.
And by the way,
and I moved out that day.
That example is similar to too good to be true. For first period, nobody believed OJ could do something like that. And he was considered the greatest guy on earth. And that's just as you said, it's hard to believe. Now, I don't know if you knew that, if you could see that night at McDonald's that he was uptight, he was mad, he'd had pissed off in Nicole. I don't know if any of that stuff you could see any of that. But apparently,
yeah, that's all in the that's all part of the one of the questions in the trial. No, he was. I said he was in a somber mood, and I could see that he didn't want to talk. He was in thought, and that was my answer in court. And then Robert Shapiro, I believe, cross-examined, just said, "So you can tell me how a person feels?" And I was like, "Well, that's just my opinion of what I saw." That he did not want to talk, so I didn't want to.
Jim, go back into our archives. I mean,
you'll like our shows.
You love pop culture. There's some great. I mean, the whole show is great. And ever since OJ died, it's just we've taken the game to the next level. And our audience has responded. 4 million views last month.
Yeah, and
4 million.
And by the way, Jim also loves sports. I know that he likes talking sports. So sports is what I love too, because I'm from Wisconsin. That's what when it's winter. It's all you do.
Kato,
you were born in Milwaukee. It gets better and better.
Jim, I didn't even bother to call Kato for the 3 days after that Eagles game because Jordan Love was hurt. They lost. I knew don't even go there. Yeah, I didn't even bother.
And I'm diehard Brewers, Bucks, and Packers. So you were
I grew up
in
with
Wisconsin.
Bears,
yeah, of course.
Oh,
I saw Vince Lombardi on the sidelines. My football coach at elementary school admired Vince Lombardi. We wore Packer uniforms.
Oh, yeah. Well, my dad, we had 44 tickets to games. My dad had a restaurant, so he got his best clients. He got 44 tickets to Packer games. He's got a letter. My father passed away, but we have a letter that used to be in our hallway in Milwaukee, a letter from Vince Lombardi thanking my dad with all the famous Vince quotes. So I was raised with this of people don't understand when you have loyalty, you'll always have that loyalty because of Lombardi and my dad, and that's a whole nother show, but I was raised with just Sundays watching Green Bay Packers with my mom and dad. And this is a real quick story. My mom and dad were in Wisconsin, eat a lot of cheese. They're a little bit on the heavy side. But every time the Packers would score, we had a long hallway. My mom would run and my dad would run, and they would hit stomachs and kiss each other after every Packer touchdown.
Okay, that makes sense. That's a true story now, right?
That's a true story.
But by the way, you guys can have that love because you got 1 Super Bowl win. You got 4. I got 0 growing up with the Vikings. They owe me. Then I'll be loyal again.
Jim, thank you.
All right, Jim, thanks, man. Enjoy Greenwich. All right? Take care. Thanks again. And thanks, Jill Shively. Again, she's such an ally of this show, and she connected me with Jim, so we really appreciate that. So let me just say what I always do. Listen to this in your car. Okay, there's so many details here, like the last few weeks too. I mean, you want to go back and listen to Jim and some of the timeline and details of the biggest Ponzi scam in history. So Spreaker doing a great job on the audio side. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure you do it. Share it. Tell everybody. Get the comments going in here. Follow us on social media. The community page of our YouTube channel too is where we keep you updated on the next guests.
Yeah, I always tell people to go to YouTube because they can see us in person and they can see Tom with his glasses and his new haircut.
Yeah, well, these are another pair of prescription glasses.
I like them.
You know what? And Jim, you're probably going, what the hell's up with that dude? Here, let me just answer this question. This is part of my bold initiative of 2024. Okay? This was a conscious effort. I have tinted regular glasses. I don't care. I could be just another white guy sitting next to Kato, Kaelin. I choose not to do that. I'm trying to elevate this a little bit. And this is it. I'm doing it. I got some gray and blue tinted glasses that I'm going to be debuting here soon.
Look, it's catching on. It's catching on. I'm doing it too. I can't believe that. What happened to my glasses? Tom,
right.
what a great show. And I, for everybody that's watching, so many great shows in our library. And of course, this one with Jim, it's fascinating. People should just watch it.
Yep. And we thank our audience because the numbers are reflecting it. So thank you. This is the fastest growing true crime pop culture scandal podcast anywhere. And we have only just begun.
We're an Apple pick.
Yep, we're taking over this space. We are. I'm just telling you right now.
I got to pick up some apples, by the way. Thank you for telling me that.
Hey, your neighbor, you can pluck them from their tree.
That's
Go back
true.
on TMZ.
Those are oranges.
Again, send your comments. Make sure you follow us on social media, and we will keep the good stuff rolling. So for the one and only Kato, Kaelin, and Zeus over here, I hope you're still awake, Zeus. I know you got a hot date coming up. Tom Zenner Scandal, 1 Degree of Scandalous. We will catch you next week. Hey, if you enjoyed that awesome episode with Jim Campbell about the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, make sure you get into our inventory and check out all of our shows. Subscribe and like our channel. And if you want to know all about the Idaho killings, we got it for you right here. And this is the story of how O.J. Simpson got busted in Vegas.